The American experiment is built on the principle of self-government, which includes true civic discourse and engagement. But is that a dying skill these days, and is it the cause of our polarization and contempt?
Disagreement was an art form. You studied it, you perfected it. It was essential to democracy, and it required that people came back into the room the next day, ready to have a conversation again.
On this episode, we explore why the lost arts of debate and discourse and true civic engagement and the institutional spaces to practice these arts might be the missing ingredients that can heal our country's division and restore a sense of civic unity. This is Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and this week we're talking about what's actually one of my favorite topics, this state of discourse today, and how we can improve it. To have this conversation, I'm pleased to welcome into our virtual studio Sabrina Shaeffer. She serves as the Vice President of Public Affairs for the R Street Institute in Washington, D.C. Sabrina, welcome to Defending Ideas.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. You wrote an essay recently for a national review titled Self-Government Takes Practice. We've stopped rehearsing. It's an excellent piece. We'll link to it in the show notes, and that's what we want to talk about today. And the way I want to tee it off with you is, I think it's clear to anybody, if we look on cable news, if we look at social media, just kind of anywhere where there is debate and discussion about any of the issues we face today as a country, Americans are kind of terrible to one another. We are not good at true discourse or debate. We have lost the art of debate, and that's unfortunate because it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And you talk about this in your essay, that it's central to self-government, and there's some serious deficits we have as a country that we need to fix. So I'd love to maybe start off by asking you to start by maybe helping us understand what is broken in American discourse today. What do you find in your essay that creates some serious challenges for us as a country?
Well, that was a great way to set this up, and I'm in agreement that we have a lot of challenges, but we are sort of poised at this sort of wonderful milestone that we're about to reach this year with America's 250th birthday to sort of recommit to some of these principles that help sort of establish this idea of civil discourse. And this essay came out of a conference we held at the R Street Institute called our Real Solutions Summit. And it was a day-long convening of speakers and panels and conversations centered around America's 250th birthday. And as part of that, I moderated a panel on American discourse with Eli Lake of the Free Press and Emily Chamley Wright of the Institute of Humane Studies. And during the conversation, Emily made this comment that learning how to engage in real and respectful disagreement, it requires, muscle memory. She said it takes 1,000 rehearsals to build the habit. And it sort of brought me back to research I did as a graduate student in history of the college literary societies that developed during the early republic. And these were, in effect, debate societies that helped prepare young men for their roles as leaders in public life. And I think we are missing that preparation, and we're missing that drive to be prepared and to have those kind of difficult conversations. And so there's a lot to be learned from our founding.
Well, let's dive in a little bit, because one of the things you write in your essay, you say, I want to read this brief quote: "What's different isn't the temperature of our rhetoric, it's the absence of a shared commitment to the ideals of self-governance and the framework to ensure it succeeds." So with that, I want to ask you, does that mean it's not new? Like, I think there's this narrative out there that, well, sometime in the past, discourse and government and politics used to be collegial and respectful and wonderful, and in the last 10 or 20 years, we've just totally taken a nosedive away from those principles. We need to return to what it used to be like. Is that not right? Is this not a new phenomenon, but it's maybe different in some way?
That's exactly right. It's definitely not right. And I feel like it's so important to emphasize that there's never been this golden age of civility in American politics, even though it can feel like we're in a bad place right now, but there's a historian I really admire. Her name is Joanne Freeman. She's at Yale, and she wrote this book years ago called Affairs of Honor, and it really maps out sort of the honor code that kept people in line, so to speak, when they were working in public life. But she describes the founding era as one that was tainted by regional distrust, personal animosity, accusation, suspicion, implication, denouncement. I mean, it sounds like she's talking about today, right? And so I often go back to that description because it gives me a sense of reassurance that this isn't new, but we do seem to, we have different tools at our disposal today, and our norms have shifted. That's something that Eli Lake talked about in our conversation. So what's considered acceptable is very different, and we no longer have that code of honor that Freeman talks about. So I guess to summarize, yeah, political vitriol is not new, but the difference between our rhetoric today and that of the founders is that they really did train themselves to participate in Republican life. And sometimes that was in the form of self-improvement. You think of Benjamin Franklin, and sometimes it was in a more formal setting like the literary societies and someone like James Madison. But they all believed deeply in this idea of self-government, and they knew that they needed to be prepared to engage with one another. And that's where I think we have a lot of work to do today.
Sabrina, one of the things that comes to mind is, based on what you're saying, that this idea of self-government, that it really implies a sense of, well, there's a responsibility that I have as an individual to my country and to the constitutional republic. If I claim to love this country and love our constitutional system and want things to be better, then I actually have a really powerful responsibility in terms of how I act in that regard. And I think often, I hear this all the time, especially in recent years, of sort of there's a strong frustration among many, I would say most Americans, of, well, why can't members of Congress just get together and work together and fix all these problems we're facing as a country? Like, it's their problem, it's their fault. Why can't they just do it? Yes, but if we as citizens can't even do that, and we who don't even do this stuff for a living, so I would kind of turn it on those folks and say, how can you expect your member of Congress to be civil and constructive and find common ground and get things done if you cannot even do that with your uncle or your neighbor or your coworker who you disagree with about politics? So is it fair to kind of say the responsibility lies with us as individuals? We have to be willing to do the hard work of self-government.
I think that's such a great insight, and it's true because there's so much, when you look at Congress, there's so much grandstanding, there's so much political theater, and it's easy to get caught up in that and forget that most interactions are happening between people like you and me, right? And at your dinner table, and this summer when people are traveling to see family and friends, right? And so I think one of the reasons that people are so concerned is that there is this complete lack of trust, right? We've seen rapid decline in trust in our institutions, in the American experiment, and in one another. And, Pew Research, and I mentioned this in the article, they've been tracking public trust for decades. And in 1972, public trust of among one another was at 46%, and it's dropped now almost 10 points to 34%. This is a stark decline, and people are feeling that. And there's a growing concern that this lack of trust is the result of political polarization, that we're no longer a country that thinks about its communities, but just that we're fueled by this sort of like individualism, and that our conflicts have become debates over who we think we are, our identity, rather than any kind of reasoned differences of opinion. And so I think that makes it feel, maybe perhaps a bit more challenging to sort of overcome these differences, because it gets to the heart of, you're just not like me, maybe, is right. As we've lost this common thread of what binds us all together. And that is something that we have to work at getting back to.
I want to return to this idea of muscle memory that you mentioned a few minutes ago, and kind of ask, like how did we get here? How did we lose this muscle memory? And maybe offer a thesis based on what you're saying, that You said earlier there's never really been this golden age of civility in the country, and so this sort of this sense of, we just have to return to the way things were at some point in the past. That's not really the right approach necessarily. But is it safe to say that in the past, when there was still some vitriol and some contempt in various areas of American politics, as you've outlined, that the capacity for human beings to be nasty to one another when they disagree on serious issues is sort of an inherent human trait that hasn't really changed significantly. But is it safe to say that today the formative institutions of civil society that would have or did in the past offer a corrective to that sort of human nature of contempt and vitriol, that maybe in the past, if people kind of felt that just deep partisan division and frustration, but the civic institutions were a way to channel that frustration and sort of correct for positive, constructive ends, that we no longer have that fabric, if you will, that those civic institutions that would have offered a corrective are eroded today. And is that why the partisan contempt and vitriol feels so unprecedented?
That's an interesting theory, and I think political theorists like a Robert Putnam would absolutely agree with you. This idea that we're bowling alone, and that as we've sort of allowed civic institutions like bowling leagues to fall by the side, we have less of an opportunity to engage with people in sort of normal everyday life, people who might not agree with us, but that is an opportunity to practice, right? That kind of civic engagement. So I definitely think that's part of it. Also, I think that our tools are very different, right? When you go back and look at the decades-long disagreements between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and there's some great podcasts that go through these letters that went on for years between the two men. They disagreed vehemently about all sorts of points of how to build our republic. But it took time. It takes time to write a letter, to think out your argument, to put it together. Now we have tweets, right? It's instantaneous. It doesn't require that kind of discipline that I think the tools that our founders had. And there's a quote, and I can't remember if I included it in the essay or if I just had it, but I had it here for today. When I was looking back on some of my research about the literary societies, there was this great quote from one of its members who was there were two societies. There was the Whig Society and the Cliosophic Society. And if you think of the sort of rivalry that exists today with like sports teams, and you apply it to the early republic, it was these debate societies. And one of the quotes he said was, that the Whig Society did more to remove boyish habits and make men of us and men of sound and correct principles for society and life than all the reasoning and lecturing, moral or religious, that ever was uttered. And I think it was this idea that disagreement was an art form. You studied it, you perfected it. It was essential to democracy, and it required that people came back into the room the next day, ready to have a conversation again, and that's very difficult. It's hard for all of us, but it's no longer something that we are practicing.
Well, why did those things go away? You mentioned the Whig Society, or in your essay, some of the literary societies on college campuses. We obviously had them at some point, especially as you're looking back in the early founding. What happened to those institutions? Why are they no longer there today?
So I'm definitely not an expert in exactly what happened to our sort of civics, or sort of the dissolution of our civics infrastructure. I have a colleague who was recently at a used bookstore, and she mentioned that she found this civics textbook from the 1940s. And she said it was fascinating because she was reading the introduction, and it was all about sort of rekindling and maintaining the understanding of who we are as Americans, and where our how our ideas came out of the Enlightenment, and these values of self-government have to be understood and practiced and passed on to future generations, or that the American experiment will fail. And I thought, gosh, even growing up in the 1980s and 90s, I never had a textbook like that, right? So at some point between my parents' generation and my generation, that did go away. And unfortunately, I think it's been replaced by a lot of a lot of teaching that's sort of anti-democratic, right? That questions the idea of a democracy, questions liberal democracy, questions the idea of self-governance. And so we have a lot of rebuilding to do because we now have a whole generation or two that have grown up without this. And I think it's enabled that our schools and our universities become these battlegrounds for identity politics rather than meaningful learning, for debate, and for a shared understanding of who we are as Americans.
Sabrina, it seems like I want to see if we can capture sort of what are the modern equivalents of, I mean just the modern sort of spaces where we engage with one another, the town square of 2025, if you will. And obviously, we say cable news, we say social media and the internet broadly speaking. You've mentioned college campuses. Can you kind of give us a rundown of, is that it? Are there others? What are sort of the spaces where we do engage today, though it seems like we're engaging very imperfectly. We're not engaging in the way that's necessary for true civic, constructive self-government. But help us just kind of have a landscape of what are the spaces today and how are they doing in this regard?
That's a good question. I think, a big place for this obviously is our media. We have room for opinion commentary. Despite the changing media landscape, I continue to write articles, right? Because I'm in hope of, persuading people of my perspective. And if you ever read the comments, there's going to be lots of people who disagree with you on the silliest things. But, it's helpful to have that. Occasionally I've responded thinking maybe this is an opportunity. At an organization like an R Street or a Sutherland Institute, obviously we have a lot of programming that's geared toward bringing people together of diverse perspectives and ideas. But those are very concerted, sort of thoughtful spaces. I think one of the challenges, and I certainly mentioned this in the article, is that, I spent many years doing cable news. And while on one hand, it taught me a lot about debate, on the other hand, I realized I wasn't actually convincing anybody of anything, right? The people who were listening already agreed with me, or they wanted me to be even more extreme, right? But most of the time, I wasn't actually having an impact. And I think that began to bother me that, hey, it's okay. We come from different backgrounds and perspectives, and I may really disagree with you on healthcare or on school choice, on taxes, but I'm open to hearing your opinion. And I think one of the challenges we're facing now is that our media, which should be an opportunity to have these kinds of debates, are increasing. I have to listen to NPR to get my sort of left of center news feed, and I have to listen to Fox News to get my right of center. But very rarely do the two sides meet. And so I do think we have this challenge. Of course, we have new platforms opening up every day, places like the Free Press that are really geared at bringing more voices together. And I think that's a very, it's a critical function right now.
Well, what do you think in terms of what we do about all this? I mean, if we talk solutions for a minute, do we need to bring back literary societies on campuses? Do we need to kind of revive civic institutions in some way? What would you say are some things that we can start to do as a country, as a society, to create the spaces where we can rehearse self-government so we can get good at it again?
This is a topic that is definitely on my mind. My oldest daughter is about to leave for college in a month. And I was thinking about her in the context of FIRE. They do this survey every year of college students. And, in the most recent one, I think it was 80% of students admitted to this problem of self-censorship. And they weren't self-censoring because they were taking a moment to reflect on their thoughts. They were self-censoring because they were concerned that students or professors might negatively respond to their perspectives. And so I'm thinking, it's absolutely essential that we carve out more spaces for disagreement. And these have deteriorated. One of them was Grinnell College. I know that there was a student that talked about starting a free speech club and fire reports on how they were canceled for doing this, right? And we know that a lot of high school debate societies have gone by the wayside, and there's more and more sort of speaker disinvitations. My own alma mater, Middlebury College, there was a lot of bad behavior when Charles Murray came to speak. So these are opportunities for colleges to take a step back and say, hey, maybe we're not actually teaching our students. But I say all that with also in the context that there's some glimmers of hope. There's some different programs. Incubate Debate is one of them. And there's also, I spoke with a friend recently. She works at MIT. They have a whole new program. It's called Compass. And they grapple with these big questions of the day in a kind of interdisciplinary way. And it's used to promote a sense of community across disciplines and let people know that they can share ideas and bring their experience from the chemistry lab or from the history department to sort of explore questions together. So I love those both of those programs, and I'm excited to see where they go to.
Sabrina, some of the other things that have come online in recent months and years, there are some other nationwide initiatives that I'm aware of. Obviously, our governor here in Utah, Spencer Cox, in his time leading the National Governors Association as chair, he had his Disagree Better initiative, and of course that effort continues. There is the Dignity Index, another thing that's come out of Utah. Braver Angels, another national organization looking to try and model healthy, constructive debate. And there are a lot of voices out there just saying that this is, maybe in some ways sort of an existential threat to the ability to engage in self-government, the ability to have a functioning constitutional republic. And I agree with all of that. I think all of these efforts are essential and valuable. I do want to offer what I perceive as sort of a critique of some of these and ask you to respond to it and disagree with me, of course, if you think I'm wrong. But it seems that in our political discourse today, there are, broadly speaking, two categories. One, there are the folks that say we need to restore respectful debate and healthy disagreement and constructive dialogue. And most of the voices articulating that usually do not actually model how to do that. There are events and discussions of people kind of sitting around agreeing with, we need to get better and more respectful at how we disagree and debate. But then I'm like, I want to see it in action. Like, show me how do you disagree with someone vehemently but still want to go out to lunch with them afterwards. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have folks who are very firm in what they believe and very articulate in various policy or political positions. But a lot of them are kind of jerks to folks on the other side. So I think there's got to be a way where we can still feel like we can be firm when we have core principles we want to be strident about, but adopt kind of this disagree better mindset to actually put it into practice, to model it. So any response to that is the movements are great. There's constructive things happening, but there's still some evolution that needs to happen.
I think that's a perfect way of capturing it. So I work at a think tank that is steeped in sort of classical liberal values. We believe deeply in free markets, limited, effective government. But we also believe in the idea of principled pluralism and this idea that difference is good. It's one of our core values, right? And that we recognize that coming from a different experience or bringing a different background can be helpful, and that we believe in sort of true diversity when it comes to intellectual diversity. And we encourage people to challenge one another. Do the work to have an opinion is something we talk a lot about. Don't just come in guns a-blazing without any, data to back up your claims, but do the work to have an opinion and challenge your colleagues and bring a different perspective to the table. And it's not easy, but we hope that we're creating an internal culture that encourages that. And then we try to bring that same posture to the work that we do with other organizations. And I'm sure you have experienced this in a similar way, but sometimes it's very difficult to bring people in who have different viewpoints. And I remember, sort of over the course of my career organizing events and programming and trying to identify someone who would bring a different perspective, and people are nervous and sort of understandably that Perhaps you're going to be playing a game of gotcha and explaining, no, it's not that we're looking to put someone on the spot. It's looking for you to poke holes in our argument or to pressure test something and tell us why we might be wrong or why we should be thinking about this differently. And it doesn't mean that we have to create consensus, but we need to create the spaces for that civic engagement.
Why do you think people are reluctant to do that, whether in the political or policy space or even just regular voters? Why, there's this reticence to, sitting down and talking with somebody in a genuine way who totally disagrees with you. Why do you think, at least from my perception, it seems like a lot of people are really reluctant to do that? Why do you think?
Oh, I think I'm included in that, right? It's hard. You feel vulnerable, right? And maybe it's different for every person. For myself, I know sometimes I'm worried, what if I'm wrong? Or what if I don't remember the stat? Or what if I have something, what if I haven't done the work to have the opinion, or I just, I lose the information. It goes out of my head. And so sometimes you decide to stay quiet. But I'm trying to be better at that too, to just politely say, oh, you know what? Have you thought about it this way? Is a way to do it. But it is, we're humans. It's hard. Nobody likes to feel like they're under attack or that they're going to be on, the spotlight's going to be on them in a negative way. And obviously today we have in certain environments, certainly I'm thinking about my children now, there is this real risk of being misconstrued. And you say something, but maybe you don't say it exactly the right way, or it's misunderstood and you're canceled or you're shunned. And those instances have real consequences. And so I can sympathize with students, especially feeling like I'm not going to speak up. I'm just going to let my classmates do it and I'll, sit back. But I think that we need to do more as a community. And there's a lot of pressure, obviously, on universities now to create these spaces for civic engagement. But we hope that at an organization like an R Street, where we make this a priority, that we can help at least lead and demonstrate that this can be done in a constructive way.
Sabrina, I think that maybe one of the elements to this is that there is a perception among folks out there that the disagree better, the healthy debate, the engage in civic responsibility, all these kinds of things we're talking about, that we would say, let's come together and have these conversations in a constructive way, ideally within kind of a renewed and reanimated civic infrastructure that maybe we've been lacking. The sense that I get is that part of the reluctance is sometimes the implied pitch, and often the explicit pitch of engaging in that work is, hey, if you come to the table and do this, you might actually learn some areas where you're wrong, or where your position needs to reform, or being open-minded to maybe they're right about some things. And the feeling that I get is that a lot of people, if your pitch is, hey, come and do this so you can be proven wrong, I just don't think is effective. That I think people, if they feel like they have to choose between the positions that they believe in, the principles that they have, the policy or political preferences that they think are important. I think if we're pitching to folks, choose between that or healthier, more constructive civic engagement and debate, I think they're going to view it as, folks maybe view it as sort of a Trojan horse of, well, the call for civic respectful debate is really just an attempt to kind of get me to soften in my positions and become a squishy moderate. Do you see that at all, or am I kind of way off on that?
No, you're not way off on it. I think that there are some areas where certainly we have experienced, and I'm sure I imagine other more right of center organizations might feel like this, where there's groups like that want you to come on, but you feel like you're maybe the token limited government group, right? And so, well, I'm not just the token group. I have a real set of ideas and values that drive our policy work, and we want to make sure that we're bringing those to the table. It's one of the reasons that, at R Street, we are not tethered to either political party, and we call balls and strikes as we see them. And in part, it's so that we can have a seat at the table where we otherwise might not be able to. If we're able to sort of maintain our credible independence, then we're able to take a seat. But that's very different than feeling like you're being brought in just so that they can say, oh, look, we have a free market group here with us, and they also agree with XYZ left of center idea, right? And so it is a little bit difficult to balance that sometimes, but I think you're onto an important thing that we need to still be able to feel like we can maintain our values and ideas while also believing and listening to other people.
Here's a pitch I want to offer and see how you respond to it. As far as like, I guess, how we would pitch this to other people, whether we're talking to regular voters, if we're talking to people in the policy and political space. Here's how I try to frame it as maybe a disagree better 2.0 or whatever model you choose, is that, I consider myself a center-right conservative kind of guy, and inherent in what I hope to accomplish in my vocational work in these political and policy spheres is I want to persuade more people that the kind of values I think are important are good. Classical liberal ideas, if you've talked about, the constitutional structure, separation of powers, free enterprise, the importance of the family and faith organizations as core civic institutions. Go down the list of whatever are the things that I believe are important. My goal is to persuade others to say, yeah, these things are important. They are really valuable, and have that influence public policy. And can we pitch this elevated form of self-government and civic engagement and true constructive debate to others in this way, to say that, look, if you want to persuade more people to agree with you, the way you do that is to get really good, really skilled at constructive disagreement, at civic engagement, where you are going into these spaces that if you go in and you fire off an angry tweet, or you send a contemptuous text message, or you just kind of roll your eyes and throw up your hands and I just can't deal with these people, you're persuading no one. You are failing in your mission. The things you believe in to be important are deteriorating because of your inability or unwillingness to go into those spaces and say, I want to debate and discuss with you to hone my ability to be better at persuasion. And if that's sort of the pitch, that we're not asking you to leave your values at the door, we're asking you to bring them with you, but engage in a constructive, respectful way with the hope of maybe you can persuade somebody. And if anything, you will become better at articulating and defending your own values.
I love the way that you captured that. And it's interesting because I think we forget that it takes a lot of work to persuade people. I was reading, I imagine many of your listeners have read Walter Isaacson's biography of Benjamin Franklin. And he has a whole section about the work that Franklin did to teach himself how to be persuadable, right? He wanted to be persuasive. He was not, he did not have sort of the fancy, at the time it was considered the fancy Harvard education that some of his counterparts had. But he was a self-learned, self-improvement individual, and he practiced different styles of persuasion. And I love this section because he's thinking about, how do I start on their playing field, or how do I disarm them? And it was really sort of, he was tapping into things that now are inherently part of the way we think about, moving public opinion. Something that you learn a lot when you do any kind of experimental research is, starting on your so-called opponent's playing field, right? Don't start by undermining their concern or their frustration, but start by saying, you're right. If we're talking about the wage gap, you're right. Sometimes the workplace is unfair to women, but I don't think it's as unfair as you're presenting it, right? And then you can kind of walk backwards from there. And I just thought there's a big lesson to be learned from our founders in terms of how they practice that, because I think you're absolutely right. You want to hold on to those values. You ultimately want to persuade people of those values, but it might take a couple of takes until you figure out the right approach to do that. And just one last thought on it is, being in person. I think we're in a very different world now. Obviously, our founders weren't always in person, right? They did a lot of letter writing. But one thing I did learn from television was that sometimes I would do like these roundtable events, especially one on PBS. And it's very hard to sit at a table with someone who you disagree with and be nasty, right? You can be frustrated by their arguments, but you're looking them in the eye and you're thinking, this person across from me is a mother, she's a grandmother, she might be a lawmaker, right? She's a human being. And so I'm going to choose my words carefully. I'm going to challenge her. But I'm not going to be, it's not like doing it through a screen. It's very different. And I think it's a helpful reminder for all of us, whatever world we live in, to try to have those practice and those face-to-face conversations.
Well, I think it speaks well to your overall argument in this discussion and in your essay of the revival of these civic institutions. One of the things we talk a lot about here at Sutherland is this idea that the major institutions of civil society, the erosion of these institutions or the inappropriate politicization of these institutions is a major factor that's limiting our ability to do all the things we're talking about, to engage in self-government, to have constructive debate. The family being, in many respects, chief among those, faith communities being vital. Of course, our institutions of government, the role of Congress and all the issues with that institution not sort of living up to its core role. And the thing that comes to mind, I guess, two thoughts is, number one, I think we ought to be viewing this as, again, the goal is persuasion. I want to build a coalition. I want as broad and as wide of a coalition as possible behind all the policy and political ideas I think are important. I'm never going to do that by insulting anyone who disagrees with me. I have to bring them into the fold. And that doesn't mean softening on core convictions, but it means trying to speak to them in a way that resonates with where they are, to invite them into the fold. And the other thing that comes to mind is, I think, and this goes back to your overall point about civic institutions, I had a friend a number of years back who he and I were on different sides politically of most issues, and he made kind of the quip once that he and I were intellectual sparring partners, because we would frequently have debates that were very boisterous, but at the time, at the end, we'd always end up being, still remained friends at the end of it. And I feel like that's what I want to see more of in our politics today, whether voter to voter, elected official to elected official, that we can disagree significantly on really important issues, but we can debate in such a way that, in the same way that two professional boxers go into the ring, they spar together, but at the end of it, there's a respect, there's a collegiality. And can we revive that somehow, that even if we're sparring intellectually, at the end of it, we can say, man, Sabrina, you landed some good hits. Those are some really good points. I don't agree with you a lot, but hey, let's continue this. Let's continue to refine our arguments to get better. Maybe that's a pipe dream, but that's what comes to mind as something that could really be constructive to bring back.
I love that. And I think there is so much that there was a time not that long ago, I agree, where, we might have had a presidential debate that did end that way, right? And I think we're in a period of disruption. Certainly this complete lack of our institutions is not unfounded, right? There's reasons people that no longer trust these institutions. And we're at whether or not you agree with the sort of burn it all down mentality, it's where we are politically. And I think the dust will settle, right? And then we will have an opportunity to rebuild and to hopefully kind of get back to, I don't know if we need to get back to politics as usual, but maybe to a place where we can actually have what you're describing. And I often think about, as we're talking about early American history, there was a historian back in the 1970s who wrote about the women of the early republic. And she talks about what they refer to as small r Republican mothers. And the idea was that they helped kind of correct their husbands when they would sort of lapse from these limited government, small r Republican ideals, and kept them sort of focused on how to, on public virtue and limited government and all of the values inherent in our Constitution. And so women didn't have a direct role in politics. So this indirect function was really important, helping men. And in a way, we need that. We all need sort of a Republican mother in our life, right? To help us, nowadays, obviously women are active members of the political sphere, and that's wonderful. But we all need to be helping sort of raise engaged citizens, to reinforce this idea of civic responsibility, civic engagement. And I think we can hold one another accountable with that sort of mindset that we're all here. In my view, I still want that small r Republican, those Republican values. But whatever your political persuasion, we're all here to help sort of foster that civic responsibility with one another.
Well, Sabrina, we've got just about a minute or so left. The last question I want to ask you is a two-parter. One, just speaking to general voters, anyone watching this or listening to this that thinks, I resonate with this, like, yes, I'm on board. what do I do? What's the one big thing I need to go and do to help fix these issues? What would you say to that voter? And connected to that, why do you feel hopeful that we can actually do this?
That is a good question. Well, I feel particularly hopeful because I've been thinking a lot about our semi-quincentennial birthday, and I think it's coming like right at this perfect moment where Americans are craving that sense of unity again. And I'm sure, like many of your listeners, I was at a July 4th parade. It was sort of every political persuasion was represented in the crowd and in the parade, and everybody felt united. And I think there's a hunger for that. And so I feel optimistic that we have this moment as a country to sort of hit pause and look back and think about what we've done well, to recommit to these ideas of self-governance, to recommit to the ideals of our Constitution, to remember to read history, to remember where these ideas came from, to look around the globe and see that, every sort of opportunity out there to model liberal democracy, there's a group out there trying for it. And I think that gives me hope. And it's going to be a bumpy road. It's not perfect, but I feel like there's a lot of energy and there's a big appetite to move in the right direction. So I'm going to stay optimistic for 2025 and 2026.
Well, I will join you in that optimism and encourage our audience to do the same. And Sabrina, we'll leave it there. We really appreciate this conversation, appreciate your essay. Again, it's titled Self-Government Takes Practice. We've stopped rehearsing. In National Review, we'll include the link to the show notes. We've been talking with Sabrina Shaeffer, VP of Public Affairs for R Street Institute. Sabrina, thank you again for being with us on Defending Ideas.
Thank you so much. This was really a delightful conversation.
Well, we will take a quick break before we leave you all with some final talking points. Once again, this is Defending Ideas. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back. What our guest described in today's discussion, this art of debate, of civic engagement, the work of self-government, it's not easy. But if you and I claim to love this country and what it stands for, and if we hope to restore a sense of civic unity, even when disagreeing, we must be willing to engage in the work. So my main takeaway for you today is this: to commit to becoming an expert at the art of true debate. That means being willing to discuss contentious topics with people who disagree with you, but go into the conversation with the goal of showing respect and love at every turn, asking lots of genuine questions, and honing your own ability to sharpen and strengthen your arguments. Notice I did not say that you need to go into the conversation with the goal to convince the other person that they're wrong. Persuasion is a worthy goal, but true persuasion only comes from a foundation of respect, of curiosity, and a willingness to concede solid points when warranted. I really believe you and I can recover this lost art and return it to our public spaces where we discuss important issues of the day, and look for opportunities to practice this essential ingredient to self-government. And I think you'll be positively surprised by the result. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles, or with a friend, family member, or a coworker who may find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas this week. From the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City, I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.